Thank you for coming to our second webinar in this series. What happens when we put our gifts into God's hands? God does remarkable things, and sharing stewardship ideas for your congregation. And like last time, I'm hoping that my presentation will be about 30 minutes and then time for you to ask questions, bring ideas, and join the conversation. My name is Karen Plater. I am Associate Secretary for Stewardship and Planned Giving, and I'm joined by my colleague, Maggie, who is our Gifts Coordinator, and she's going to help with the question and answers. So just just a note that this is part of the work we do with gifts to Presbyterian sharing from congregations and individuals, and it's part of our efforts to equip congregations in stewardship. The recording will be available in the webinar section at the website. It's just the same place that you registered for this. I realized when I was setting up today that the recording from last week is not linked there yet, so I will be sure that this one and last week's or the last month's is put up promptly. Just a note on protocol, please stay muted. You can use the question and answer to ask anything. There's no stupid questions, as we say. We're just learning together and sharing our experiences. And I always love the questions because it helps me tailor these ones for the future. If you do ask a question or write it in and you're doing it as the presentation is going along, just be sure to refer to what you need information on in the question. Sometimes we get, can you explain more? And we're like, oh, on what part? So be sure to do that. And as I said, at the end, there'll be an opportunity to unmute and ask questions verbally. So with that little bit of housekeeping, today's topic is talking about help. We're behind budget. What do we do next? And before we begin, we're just going to acknowledge that congregations across Canada meet and are situated on the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples, and that together we're on a journey of healing and reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And we recognize that our standard of living is very connected to the people who were here before our ancestors came. Just a reminder, this is part of a 4-week series. Last week, we talked about lessons and ways that we can encourage good stewardship with the language that we talked about. Today, we're going to dive deep into and answer your questions, I hope, about how it can be helpful to ask people to give and what can we do to make ourselves confident askers when we're doing this. I have a little bit of overlap from week 1, so if you weren't here from week 1, I'm going to bring up a few points just because I want to keep them grounded in the theology and how this is connected to our faith. So there'll be a little repetition, but I'm hoping we can go a little deeper into the issues that we began to touch on last week. So the first thing that we had is just to remember that stewardship is faith in action. It's the ways that we as individuals participate in our faith. It's the way that we recognize that everything we have is a gift from God and ways that we can give back and participate in God's mission. And it really is a spiritual discipline. It's something that we can learn. I tell lots of people when I'm doing these webinars, I'm always trying to put so much stuff in because I have 18 years of learning in this specific role, and then, 53 years of learning over my lifetime about what it means to both recognize the gifts that I've been given and see how they can participate in God's mission. So we don't have to know everything right away. We can learn and grow, just as the same way that we learn and grow our prayers. All right, so it's also a reminder that I'm trying to couch these learnings and these discussions in an understanding that there's two elements of stewardship that we really explore as Christians and as churches. One is how we as individuals use the gifts that God has given us to participate in God's mission, and then how we as a congregation and churches use those gifts that people have given to God and trust us to implement for them. So they're slightly different. There's lots of overlap in the themes when we look at this, but there's some slight differences. And today's seminar is particularly looking at how we as a congregation and church can both encourage gifts to be given to the church and then also how they are used. And it's a reminder, and I say this all the time, that stewardship is not, even when we talk about budgets and mission in context of stewardship, it's not about giving to a church ministry and mission or budget. It's about how we respond to the call of God in our lives and in our gifts. I recently went to a stewardship conference with our colleagues in the Presbyterian Church USA and the Lutheran Church. And I liked this when I was there, that they added testimony to time, treasure, and talent. And I thought that was great because I think the stories that we tell and the stories that we share as we all try to figure out this journey that we're on to becoming stronger disciples, to following Christ, is a way that we can participate in stewardship. And it's a gift. It's a gift that we can give and share to people. And it's a way we can participate in God's ministry. So I learned that at the stewardship. So I've added there to our regular time, treasure, and talent. And yeah. A reminder that when we're doing and we're asking people to give, we want the language we use to reflect our theology and what we believe. And so we're going to pay attention to that. And we always want to pay attention to it and even stop for a minute and say, oh, if I'm thinking this, or if we're going to say this, what are the deeper meanings people might see behind it? What is behind it? And really be careful about the language that we choose and what we use, because it is important. It's not so important that we need to become perfectionists and get really, really picky. We just need to consider it. And I know in the 18 years I've been doing this job, if I look back at the material that I produced when I first started, it has definitely grown as I have grown as well. So we don't need to be perfect. We just need to start and then think about it. And then, if we write a letter or an email this year, next year when we come back, don't just copy and paste the one that you wrote last year. Consider it carefully, prayerfully. Think, what have I learned since then? How have people reacted? What has God shown me? And then do something new. It may have several of the old messages in it, but you can tweak it. You can adapt it. So you don't have to start from scratch, but don't also just always send out the same thing. Otherwise, people kind of are like, oh, yeah, they'll stop paying attention. They won't look and say, what's new in here? What's different? Okay, so think about the language, and I'm going to bring this all back again. So, though, here we are. The practical thing is expenses need to be paid. So that's nice that stewardship is about all of these different things, but we need to pay the bills. And we want the church to stay open. We want it to participate in God's mission. And we know right now it's October. We can see the year end coming, and we're behind budget, and we're afraid that we're going to end in a deficit. So I really want, Karen, some practical ideas what I can do right now. Okay. I'd like to say I'm going to solve all your problems. Probably not, but let me see if I can give you something to think about, and then you can react back to me. The first thing we need to do is just get on the same page to know, what do we mean if we say there's a deficit? And basically, if you're saying we're behind budget right now, you have a deficit right now. You might not have a deficit at year end, but you're anticipating that you will. So a deficit is when you don't have the enough money to cover your expenses. So that's what your deficit is. So if you have a deficit budget, that means your anticipated income is not going to cover your anticipated expenses. So sometimes as churches, we might have a deficit budget that actually ends up in the clear. And there can be different reasons for that. We can get unexpected gifts at the year end that come in and suddenly clear off that deficit budget. We might have set a deficit budget at the beginning of the year, knowing that we have savings in the bank and that we want to, we're going to tap into those savings if the budget comes through as expected. So you have to know, sort of what we're talking about and all of that. So we can have planned deficits versus actual deficits, and you can have a deficit budget versus a year-end deficit. So often, if you're in stewardship or treasurers, you'll know all the different nuances of this. The people in the congregation won't, and they'll just be like, huh? And they're going to tune out to you. So it's not language that you want to use when you're talking to them. We've got a deficit budget, we've done this. And I've heard it at annual general, like, what does this mean as deficit? And people are like, oh, what does it mean? It sounds really complicated. It's not complicated. We want to use plain language. But if we have a deficit, what's the story that it tells? And this is the language that's important. First of all, it immediately turns us into there isn't enough and that we need to do something. If we're behind budget, panic can set in, can feel like, oh, I feel afraid. We feel a certain responsibility. We know that things need to be done. So we know that we need to do something. There's a variety of things that we can deal with a deficit. We can use the savings in the church if there are. In some cases, a loan may be taken out, or you can raise the income, or you need to cut the costs. And yeah, we'll sort of come back to this, but it's just sort of, this is a reaction. As soon as people hear that there's a deficit, well, okay. And we often relate it to our own personal finances and budgets. And we're like, okay, we know these are going to be the strategies that we need to do. So the first thing I want to say is do not panic. If you're in October and you're facing a deficit, it can be breathtaking, can take away your breath. If you're like behind budget, oh no, what are we going to do? What happens? We really got to make it until the December 31st. Well, December 31st is a little bit of an arbitrary deadline. First of all, we were saying we want to meet annual expenses. And so we've said, okay, December 31st. But what you have in the bank December 31st and what you have in the bank at the beginning of the year, that's not going to be necessarily different. And you can deal with and come up with some of these solutions and implement some of the solutions later in the year. So do not panic. I think the worst thing that can happen is like it's a panic and everybody's scrambling and you're causing more stress and anxiety than you need to. And people don't, it's hard to be generous in times of stress and anxiety. So we want to be sure that we are not panicking, that we are aware of what's happening, that we're making other people aware of what's happening, but we're doing it with consideration and with care. And I think that's why, that this is a ministry as much as anything else. And for us to be aware that it's not something we've necessarily done bad or, anybody has done bad. It's just, this is what has happened. And so how are we going to deal with it? It's important to know that emergencies happen and people will step up in times of emergencies, but also that long-term problems require long-term solutions. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but it might be that we need to make some short, some immediate, some medium, and longer term plans. And that can help us as a committee to kind of take away the panic of this issue. So, okay, we're not panicking. We're saying we're behind budget. Well, let's consider, first of all, what's the issue? So first of all, we can say, yes, there is, first of all, that it's an emergency, or that perhaps it's a systemic problem that has been around for a while. Perhaps our income has been gradually decreasing and the expenses have been increasing and we haven't really paid too much attention to it. And maybe we didn't do a great job of budgeting and we've just kept doing the same thing. And we're now like aware, oh, we need to make a plan before this becomes really serious. And some of you might be, and we're beyond this. We already know it's serious. It doesn't matter. However serious you think it is, there is still time. And there's time to be careful, not too careful so that you're paralyzed and don't do anything, but to be careful and consider things. There's always time for that. Okay, but let's say that it's an emergency. So let's say your your furnace blew. That's a sort of capital expense or something like that, or something happened really unexpectedly. You did not expect it. It could not have been anticipated in your budget. Well, when it's an emergency, often people can understand. I think it's fair to alert the congregation about the need and to come up with a plan to say, okay, we're going to address this. It's thrown our budget off for this year because of whatever. Maybe a big donor passed away, and so your income is down a lot more than you anticipated. Or COVID hit. That was something that many of us experienced. We all experienced it, but many congregations, they're like, oh, and that affected giving partners. So know if it's an emergency, know why the emergency is happening, and make a plan to deal with it. So it might be that you take out a loan and then make a plan to pay it back gradually. It might be that you just present it to the congregation and invite somebody to step up and see what happens there. There are strategies and things that can be done to meet emergencies. And in fact, I think sometimes churches, we're at our best when emergencies happen because people like to respond to emergencies. They can see and understand an emergency has happened and I'm going to respond. And that was certainly a lesson I learned when I worked for PWS&D and continue to see when a tsunami happened, people gave and stepped up and gave generally. And PWS&D would receive $1 million over and above the regular gifts to PWS&D when an emergency really happened. But that said, and I put the bullet, is we also need to diagnose the cause. If emergencies are happening every single year and every year you're come to fall and you're like, it's an emergency, we didn't anticipate this. And it might be for different reasons, One year it was the furnace, then it was the roof, then it was the windows. Wait a minute, this isn't so much an emergency as it's a result of some deferred maintenance that hasn't happened or been considered over the years. We know if you're a church that's worshiping in a building where you own the building, there is maintenance that needs to be done and capital expenses that we should be planning for every year. So if it's an emergency that could have been anticipated, you've got to say, okay, we need to step back and diagnose the cause and be aware that we're really dealing with it because people will eventually get tired and think, I don't think this group knows how to plan very well if there's a sort of ongoing emergency every single year. And so that's where I'm going to give some ideas for you if you're finding we're stuck in a system where it's ongoing, it feels like it's desperate every year. Sometimes people will step up and surprise us, but we've been sort of slipping back and dipping into our savings, and we can kind of see if we continue this way, we might be only 5 years able to sustain this. So if it's ongoing, we need to make plans to address the issues that can underlie the reasons that you're not making budget. And in order to make a plan, you have to understand a few things. And I thought these might be helpful for you. One thing I think is just the way that people contribute. And I have mentioned this in other webinars, and we're going to keep exploring these. So the one is through the offering plate. That happens every week. It's a regular ask. It's sort of even one that we don't even explain often. We might have a nice call to invite the offerings and talk about why we give through the offering. But that's sort of our annual gifts, our regular gifts. They are undesignated generally or have broad designations. The other ways that people will give is through special projects, and these special projects may be regular projects, such as a VBS or sending kids to camp, but they also may be spontaneous projects that kind of crop up such as an emergency, such as a disaster that's happened, or something, a fire has happened, somebody's lost their house. Those are spontaneous projects. And then some that may be capital projects. And I'm not in this webinar going to go into capital projects because that'll be a whole webinar on its own. There's also a role that people may contribute to endowment and legacy funds. These are funds that have a longer term vision. They're about building in the sustainability of the church. There are sometimes in your churches called the buildings funds. They may be a property fund. They may be a mission and ministry property, but they're longer term funds that are supposed to contribute to the sustainability of the church. And then just for I threw in grants and shared expense and partnerships. They're the ways, not necessarily that individuals give, but they're the ways that places that congregations can find funding when individuals are not able to make up the amounts that they're intended to give. All right. But then who are the people? So those are the ways funds are going to come. And mostly I'm going to be talking about offering plate and special projects today. But it's important to know, who might give? Because who can help you tailor your message when you're asking people to give. So we know that we have our members, the people who are committed to the church. They're the ones who are often going to think about and plan their gifts. So they may sign up for your PAR, they may do monthly giving, they may have envelopes that they regularly put the same amount into the envelope. They're giving because they've learned the spiritual discipline of giving regularly to the church. They've probably been taught it since they were a young person. Maybe they've learned through Bible study, but they're really committed and they're often our big supporters of the church and they form the core of our givers. Then we have adherents. Adherents may be people who attend regularly and they may or may not be regular supporters of our church. There are definitely adherents who give as well or better than some of the members that we have. But there's also a lot of adherents who might just be sitting in the church and never really thought about the way that they're giving. So might have some tailored and different messages for those. Then you've got what I like to call friends of the church. And these are the people who attend a program, maybe a community program that just happens in the church building. Could be Alcoholics Anonymous, could be a guide or scouting program, could be any type of community program. Or maybe they were married there, they attended a concert there. Maybe they have children or youth or grandchildren who attended a church program there. So, but whatever, it's just people who actually don't come to church regularly on Sunday, but they know about the church and they appreciate the church and they're aware what it does and they may feel connected to it. And then there's the institutions we know. So that's the one connected to the grants. These are ones who can provide grants for funding and who may be connected. There needs to be an alignment with the mission and ministry of your church. They require applications and reporting back. And that is often through Canadian ministries. So they help churches with that. And then partners are ones who really share in your mission and ministry. And so we are seeing more and more churches who are finding partners who share the expenses, for example, of a building. And that can help offset their budget so that the budget isn't as much. But in the partners, you're looking at a common goals and aims, and you really see how each other's ministry builds on one another. Okay. So you're thinking the different ways people give and who might give, but what is it that people need to feel confident to give, whoever you find in any of those categories? It's fairly well understood that people will give to a clearly stated mission and vision. So we need to know why we're giving and what you're going to do with the money that we give, even if it's through the offering plate. People want to be able to say, yes, this is what the church does. There also need to be transparent and accountable processes. So if people don't think that the money they give is being used well because they don't know where it's going or because they don't see things happening, then that means that they won't feel confident in giving to the church. So this is really important that our finance committees and the way that we report back on finances are all transparent and accountable so people feel like, yes, when I give here, and that's connected to strong leadership as well. These are all help people decide, even those who are members, and they've said, I am going to give this much, I want to give back to God. They can decide whether to give it to the church or whether to give it to somebody else. So we want them to know, yes, and feel confident, I'm giving this to the church because I can see how it participates in God's mission. And this is connected closely to why people give. So we've talked about the spiritual discipline, returning gifts to God, but then they also have different pockets. So just like we do, we have our annual, what we plan out. So if we think of our own budgets, I know this is how much I have to pay for my utilities every year, for my insurance. This is what I'm going to budget it in, and this is what I'm going to give to the offering. But just like anything else, so I'll have spontaneous and special things that I will do. Somebody's getting married this year. Oh, I'm going to spend something different for a wedding that's coming up. And I'm going to, an emergency happens or something spontaneous. I'm going to have and make spontaneous gifts as well. And then I'm also thinking about the long term. And so I'm planning and visioning for the long term. I'm putting money into my RRSP and I can see, making plans for the future. So the same way, people can have a long-term vision for sustainability. And then the reason why people give, though, all connected to this, and for any one of those, is that there's a compelling ask or appeal. And that is where we have some best practices. I think I mentioned this last time, that time, whether you're giving a gift of time or money, it follows mission. People give to people. So when you say people give to people, it's like they don't give to programs and they don't give to buildings. So they don't give to necessarily, even though we use a short form term, oh, I'm going to give to support the VBS program. They're really giving to the young people who they see attending the program and benefiting from it. And if they're giving to improve the building or extend, they're giving because they can see how it's going to make it accessible and make people with disabilities be able to access a building. We want to make it easy and accessible, the ways to give. We have webinars that just focus on all the different ways, from pre-authorized remittances to online gifts to e-transfers to gifts of securities. You want to make sure it's done that way. You want to be sure to say thank you. If you don't say thank you and you're not prepared and you ask for a special gift, especially over and above because you're behind budget, be ready to say thank you when people give. And you can say thank you immediately, and you can say thank you when you send a gift receipt. And then share stories. Remember, people give to people and they give because they want to participate in God's mission. So tell them that. Tell them how it does it and what it does. You can use, we talked briefly about narrative budgets, which can help you articulate what happens if you give $100. This is how it's going to break down, and this is where it's going to go. This is particularly for your annual appeals. So if you're behind budget and you're asking for undesignated gifts, people want to know, okay, where is it going to go? Where's it going to help? If you got behind budget because of a specific reason, and you're saying, we just need to fill this one hole, then you can identify that reason and do a special appeal or a special project appeal. But if it's just because you've not done a good job for whatever reason, not that you haven't done a good job, but that you've underestimated the gifts that maybe will come into this year, maybe circumstances have changed and all of that, then you want to be able to encourage an undesignated gift by sharing what that undesignated gift is going to do. All right, I'm just launching my time in our 20. I'm going to remind us of a few things. One was that Henry Nouwen is a great little book called The Spirituality of Fundraiser. I think it's important for anyone who's going to do the asking to look at that, because he just really explores and gives me confidence that this is part of mission and ministry. And that, in fact, when we invite people to give, whether it's because we're behind budget, whether it's because an emergency has happened, or whether it's for whatever reason, this is part of the way that people can participate in God's mission and ministry. And it should complement the time that they spend in church, the prayers that they are giving, and the money, that is given. And this is all part of the work God has called us to do. Reminders that it's about grace. We want to always keep our eyes on God in any. So if you're crafting an email or a letter or anything like that, be sure don't take your eyes off of that mission and ministry and the grace of God. Have fun when you do it. It's about joy. It should be fun. As soon as we become reluctant or feel, obligated, people know about that. And even if you ask and you're like, this is your job, you were there, you passed this budget back in January, you've got to step up and you must give. And guilt and shame is not gonna, it may have some short-term results, but it's not going to build a strong, healthy, sustainable ministry. Whereas we had unexpected changes this past year. We find ourselves behind budget and hope that you can step up and participate in mission and ministry with us, because we've got exciting things we need to do both to the year end and into next year. Completely different message. And in the end, we need to keep our fact on the thing that we all have different gifts and everybody has a different way to participate. So this is one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of the message, everybody just needs to give $5 more so that we can meet this deficit. And if everybody would take $5 more a week, some people are going to be like, oh yeah, that's easy, no problem. Some people are going to be like, oh, I can't even begin to do that. And then some people are like, are going to be like, oh, I could have given a whole lot more. So we want to focus that when we ask, we're asking people to give out of what they have. And if you've got the time, if you've got the money, please, and want to share in it, this is the need, and this is how you can make a difference. You can do it with sense of humor, with wisdom, with all of that, and do it. But it's not about, not everyone can give the same. And but not everyone is also giving the most that they can. I think that's something that we can also struggle with. Oh, everybody's giving. We can't ask anymore. Well, that's not for us to say. We're just going to express the need, and God will determine or see what's out there. Be ready for the unexpected. And if the unexpected is that, actually we've asked and it doesn't come, if we've done all of these, then we have to be at peace and see what God has in store for us next too. All right. So one thing, if it's actually systemic problems that your budget is under and you're finding you're behind this year, I want you to think about how we can set a goal so that every member can grow in generosity this year. And don't be so focused, oh, I'm October and we need to fix the budget problem by December. No, you're going to talk about, pray about, and see with all the ministry people, with your volunteers, and see how can we choose something, choose one of these things that you're going to do to try and implement this. I want to leave time for questions. So there's two things before we jump into that. One, last week I mentioned this stewardship program for 25-26. This comes from our friends at the Center for Faith and Giving. A few people have had challenges accessing it. There was one in Alberta that just kept saying, you can't access this because you're out of the country. So we don't know exactly what was going on. If this is a problem across country, just let me know. We have alternative ways of getting the resources to you. Here's the coupon, and once I get these posted, I will include it in an email. It's been such a crazy. I can't believe that it's been a month already since I last did these, because I will get that email out to you with that stewardship coupon. And then there is a new program. They always develop these. They get released in January, though most people use them of the year later. If you're ready and you want a new program, we'll have a new one that's for released in January for 26, 27. Okay, There, I've thrown a lot out to you, maybe not as practical or as fine-tuned as I thought I might have at one point, but I'm opening this up to your questions and let's talk specifically about them. Do we have any questions, Maggie, written in the Q&A yet?
Not quite. Oh, there's a hands up from Jack.
Okay. Yeah. Yep, you can unmute yourself. Oh, we heard you. Yep, there we go.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Hi, Karen. Thanks. This catches us at a pretty good time because we're in St. Mary's just trying to get our heads around quite a few of the things you talked about, better communication and accountability. The challenge here is we have a sizable endowment that is very specifically described.
Mhm.
And we're working with the trustees of the endowment to make sure that we're not encroaching. Can you talk about creative ways to educate people on the differences between an existing endowment, not starting a new
Yep.
one, having one that actually we've had people say, well, what do you need my money for?
Absolutely. That is a brilliant question. In fact, it's an interesting question because it's a question that I got asked at General Assembly for the national offices too. They were like, what do you need our money for? You guys have lots of money in the bank and all of this. So, and you have to go back to think the answers are going to be different according to the different audience. So usually that question is coming from your members and adherents who are very actively involved and who know about the different pockets of giving or know about the resources that the church has. And so they think, so for them, it's very much about that message and exploring giving as part of a spiritual growth and spiritual discipline and why we give to the church. It's also about how the church being able to express the role that the endowment fund plays in mission and ministry and the role that gifts play. So if your vision for doing mission and ministry is is sort of bound by $100,000, and I'm just going to say that because that's an easy number, and your church endowment is providing $100,000, people are going to go, oh, okay, great. You need to present a vision that says, here is what we want to do. Yes, it's going to be funded in part by our endowment funds, but we have the capacity to fund and to use more gifts. And if you give to us, this is what we're going to do. So it's still tied into the story. If everybody is like sitting back and saying, actually, all we want to do, I mean, this is a little bit, all we want to do is keep our church doors open, and we want to have a minister here to preach with us, or to share with us every Sunday. And that's all we want to do. They might be happy with like, oh, and the endowment fund can do that and does it. But are we actually engaging in God's mission and ministry? And are we getting excited about it? So it's a little bit like that. So I think the one is to recognize that the endowment is there and let people know what the role of that is doing. So you can articulate it in a few different ways. One that I've loved, I think this was a number of churches, actually, I can think, use the endowment funds to match the gifts of others. And so because people love a good match, and when I was at PWS&D, I saw that again and again. As soon as people thought that the Canadian government would match monies for the disasters, they would give $10 because they gave, they would see that, oh, okay, $50 was actually going to go. So Presbyterians love a good deal. So that can be with the endowment fund, it matches, it makes your go even farther, your gifts. You can, but it's sort of being able to articulate what's the role and what's it doing, and what's our vision and what can we do with your gifts as well. All right, there's another hand up. Go ahead. I don't have the,
Karen.
Nat, yep.
Hi, Karen, it's Ruby. Hey, Jeff. So my question was tying into what Jeff just asked about using endowment funds. And because we're just starting to get into our budgeting season kind of thing.
Yep.
So how do you, I guess, broach the subject, or how do you tell the leadership of the church to, when you're looking at a deficit budget all the time, and knowing that that deficit budget, if you don't meet, extra givings by year end, that you have to dip into your endowment funds. That's what sort of they're there for, to a certain point, with all the different rules, that terms of reference that we have with them. How do you, what's the message that, well, I should be giving as the treasurer to say, okay, a deficit budget is okay, but if you continue to do this year over year without a solid plan on how to actually look at gaining some of those revenues for operational expenses, at some point your endowment fund that you use for, an undesignated fund for covering your deficits is going to dwindle to nothing, right? In 5-10 years, whatever. So how, what's the message to give to them?
Yep. And I think some people would be happy, they're like, all I want to do is get through the next 5 to 10 years and, don't have to worry about that. But what we're really doing, and we need to engage in, is to say that we think that there's mission and ministry left in this church, or that we want to do. So if they're kind of feeling that, and you can feel that, it's a little, if you're kind of feeling, I'm trying to think of the word that I like, yeah, all I want to do is this, then people might be content to dip into the endowment funds and then let it be somebody else's problem in 5 to 10 years. So what you want to do is you don't want to have that feeling. And I think it's really like, it's a little bit the same answer that I gave to Jeff, but it's like, you need to have that long-term plan, and you need to say the endowment gifts were gifts that were given from past generations to help us continue ministry into the future. So we're really not honoring the endowment nature of the gift if we just keep dipping into it and having it cover the current expenses, because we really want to have the current expenses covered by the gifts of the people who come to church. Now, at the same time, we know ministry is happening in a totally different context than it happened even when I started working for the church 30 years ago. We're often in older buildings that are really hard to maintain. So if we can say that we're going to use our endowment funds to help offset the costs of this building, we're going to do that. Your gifts are going to go to mission and ministry, and this is what we're going to do with them, and get people excited about those givings, and so, because again, and then don't just say, oh, we're giving to the church budget, we've done this. Do the work so that you can tell them what they're actually giving to. What are you doing with the money? How much time and money is spent preparing for worship? How much time and money is shared with the community? Who are the people's lives who are being changed? As you get those stories and you're sharing about it, and people are excited about participating in God's mission, you see the endowment fund as a tool that can help it, but not something that supplants the money that we have to give. So it's a bit like, we want to do a pancake breakfast, and I want to, all I want to do is sit and eat at the breakfast all the time. I don't know. That's not good. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. Keith, let's see if you have anything to throw into this. And if anybody has an idea that they want to riff off of here or just ask, go ahead. So Keith, let's see what you have to say.
My question, my comment or question is not really related to the endowment or that, okay. But as a novice treasurer and somebody who's I don't have a financial background. I think how I ended up being treasurer was, you're all on the line, and then all of a sudden you realize everybody stepped back, and here you are. So my dilemma, since I've been doing this job, has always been creating the budget. I know what the teams and groups in our church want to do. I know what their mission is for the year. They tell me this. We present it in many of the ways that you've talked about to the congregation. So I know what the pocket of money is that we need to spend.
Mhm.
How do I figure out what the pocket of money is that we're going to get from those people who are sitting in the seats in front of me, unless I ask them?
Absolutely.
I wonder how other people do that.
Yep, absolutely. So one, and you can base it on gifts from the previous year. So that's the sort of standard that we all do, and all nonprofits will be. You look at the gifts that came in from the previous year. Then you look at what has happened or what has changed in the past year. Has anything dramatic happened that's going to affect those gifts that are coming in? So if you know, for example, that two of your best donors just passed away, and as a treasurer, connected to it, the things you're like, that money is not coming in, then we've got to, we might be able to anticipate in the coming year that we're going to be down. Now, I find, and this is whether you're doing a national church budget or a congregational budget or a not-for-profit budget, there is a delicate balance between budgeting too conservative and not conservative enough. So we want to have a budget that is realistic. And really, the budget is for us to watch. It's for the leaders. It's for the leaders to watch where the givings are and where things, and just anticipate where we are at the year end. But at the year end, as I said, December 29th versus January 2nd, it's kind of arbitrary. So if you budget too conservatively, then people aren't going to give, because it kind of is a negative feedback. Like if you're too conservative, it's like, oh, the church doesn't, what Jeff said, no, the church doesn't really need what I have to give. If you budget too high, people feel like, oh, my gift's not going to make a difference. Like the needs are so great, I'm not going to be able to help with this. So part of it as a treasurer is to keep on track of it throughout the years. And don't think of things as a yearly thing, but think of them in terms of 3 and 5 year plans, so that we're actually seeing the trends. Are we in sort of a decline and we're going down gradually? And so we need to gradually, and then it's not just it's not a financial issue. It's really a ministry issue. Like if we're sort of going down every year here and that, it's like, okay, well, what are we doing as a church? What's our vision, and where are we going, and what are we trying to do? How are we outreaching to the community? And outreaching can be not just sitting here and thinking that people are going to come into the church. How are we going to go out to the church? How are we going to make people aware of who we are and the exciting things that they are happening? How are we going to invite them to participate in our congregation? And if and when they do come and participate in the congregation, there needs to be that ongoing education in the background, because I've heard from people who like, oh, I actually started coming to church and I'm a new member, but this church never talks about how the budget is funded, or it never asks, and there's just sort of an assumption we never talk about it. And I'm brand new and I don't know actually how this is. So be sure that you incorporate that education of people about, what does it mean to give? Why do people give? What do their gifts do? So it is that sort of finding that balance of being not too conservative, like not being too conservative, because you can cut programs. I know what I was going to say. If you're too conservative, you can end up cutting things too drastically, too early, and then you actually have a balanced budget, but you're not doing anything. So it's not really as much about balancing your budget as us saying, what are the resources and tools we have to do God's ministry? How are we articulating that to people, and how are we inviting them in to do it? And that comes back and rolls around to the endowment funds as well. You need to see those endowments as one of the tools you have. And so then bring it in and say, celebrate it, be excited about it, say, yes, we have this gift, and, you know, we can match the gifts of past generations, you know, like they have given, help us build together and do this together. So it's very much the messaging that you're doing. And so, yeah, you have to sort of see, where are we going as a church? This is not a conversation just for a finance department, committee, just for a stewardship committee, just for a mission outreach. I like that you all sort of know what the plans for the church are, and you get together and you talk about it and you share information, because it's going to build and affect everyone. And I see Allison's hand has gone up. So let's see if she's got something to contribute.
Hey,
Is it-
Karen and colleagues. I just want to play devil's advocate for a minute about
Oh, good.
your
I've been waiting for that.
comment about, you know, the $5 gift. And in fact, I just recommended that to our stewardship team, and we used that in a presentation on Sunday. Because sometimes when a congregation is dealing with a larger deficit number, and we ask people to give, they don't have any frame of reference. Oh, I could never give in a way that will help us achieve paying down the deficit. And so sometimes, and I found this as a part of a building program in our previous congregation, giving
Yep.
people a starting point to say, if you could contribute $5 over the next so many weeks,
Yep.
that can,
Yeah.
you know, help us punch a hole in that big number.
Yep. So I don't mind it if it's not the only strategy that you use. And what I would prefer is that you know that people have a different abilities to give. So that's my only thing. So I think sometimes, and I've seen this before when they've done capital campaigns, and you say, oh, there might be, you know, 5 people who can give $1,000,
Right.
which would be $5,000, and we need, you know, 20 people who can give $100, and so many who can give, you know, $5. So I would say, first of all, whatever you do needs to be tailored to your context. So there are things that are going to be able to work in some churches, and if you kind of know and you're like, oh yeah, this is really going to work, and also give it a try. Like if it's your only strategy, then I feel like, oh, it reinforces that we all have, you know, the exact same to give. And we don't know. Some people could give a lot more than $5, and some people could, you know, can't even give $5 more. So sometimes I like the ones, and I like the ones where it says, where you do put financial amounts to this. If you gave us, you know, $20, it lets us do this, you know, it lets us buy books for this. If you give us a gift of $100, if we have our stained glass window, needs to be repaired. If you wanted to make a gift of 50,000, you know, we wanted to do that. So I think there is definitely a role for making things as real and practical for people, as tangible and pragmatic. And I know. And the other reason is that when I talked about that there's different people who have different ways that they can give, I kind of agree with you in that sense that if, you know, you've got sort of people who are just coming to the church, they're new to the church, and they're all of that. Some people don't even have an idea that, oh, how much do people give weekly? And I have seen churches that have used a step chart before, where they say, oh, we have and it's particularly for the leadership, but I don't think necessarily for everyone, but for the leadership or new members, you know, oh, did you know we've got, you know, 30 people who give us $50 a week. Well, this is not with anybody being identified specifically, but 30, you know, give us this, and we have, you know, 3 donors that give 20,000 a year, and we have 1 donor gives us 100,000 a year, you know, and just so, yeah. As long as you can sort of tie it back and you're comfortable, okay, I've got the theology. So when you're asking like for $5 more, it's probably not as much. But yeah, just be aware people have different abilities to give. think about it and say, okay, we're only doing this for this campaign. We do education about proportional giving. We do all of this, for that. Then that's fine. Absolutely. Utilize a variety of strategies. Don't think everybody's going to respond to the same strategy.
Thank you. And I'll just say one other comment about that.
Yep.
And I think you and I have had a conversation about this
Yep.
previously a long time ago, but sometimes when you ask people to increase their givings, even for a short term, it creates a new pattern of giving.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm glad that you said that. That is great, because I have had people talk about the PAR program or any monthly giving program. So often when people sign up for monthly giving, and our most economical one tends to be the pre-authorized remittance program that's run by the UCC, very economical, but some have the online giving platforms now you can give $20 a month. Once you become a regular giver, they're like, well, nobody ever asks us to, do we want to increase the gift? Or it's always the same, or it kind of gets forgotten and it's running there in the background. And so I think it's important when you have those to remind people, you can thank them. You can make a special deal once a year. Thank you for your gifts. You've done that. If your situation has changed, here's the vision for our church. If you want to increase, or if you need to decrease or keep your gifts, sort of remind them that they can change those gifts they're signing up for. So I think it's important to remind. We had this conversation whenever I go to the stewardship conference with the PCUSA and the Lutherans. We talk about pledges. They have pledge cards, and there can be a whole system of how people put in their pledge cards. You collect them and you add them up. Recently, when I've been talking to my colleagues and ministers who do that, the pledge card is not about setting the church budget. It's a tool for people to be intentional and proportional and to consider it and to have like a physical, symbolic way of saying, yes, I am doing this. I'm going to consider, what am I giving this year and how am I giving it? And so it's about them having a chance to consider and do it, as opposed to if you say, oh, we're going to add up all of these pledges and see how much budget we have. Well, one, you're probably going to underestimate your budget because you're going to have lots of people who didn't give in a pledge. And then you put a lot of work into it for not necessarily getting any farther ahead, because your best indicator isn't going to be necessarily the pledge cards. It's going to be what were your past gifts and what are your trends that are going on throughout the year. But a pledge card can be good because it provides a moment of intentional reflection about what you're giving and how you want to support it into the future. And that's, I was going to say, that's what I think about sometimes for congregations when I'm always nagging for accepted allocations and recommended allocations for Presbyterian sharing. It's like, usually the best indicator for me is to look at what they was given last year.
A quick comment came in on Q&A.
Yep.
So it's Sylvia from Alberta.
Yep.
She responds to the coupon of the Center for Faith and Giving.
Yep.
And she said that the center sent them a file transfer and it works with Word.
Okay, good. Wonderful. Yes, thank you, Sylvia, for letting me know too about that wasn't working and that we were able to find a resolution. So if ever you are ever on the PCC website or any program and you notice something's not working or not there, get in contact. We want to help and we want to get the information for you, and we will scramble and do whatever we can. So keep in contact with us. That is taking us to, 59 minutes I have for our time, and I started 2 minutes late. So thank you for joining me once again and for joining in the conversation. I will say that I do have a few congregations who have started up their stewardship teams. These are some of the questions that I have, but I meet with them a few times a year. by a Zoom or a Teams call and we barter around ideas. They will come with their specific things and I can look more in depth into those and can tailor recommendations to them more specifically. So if that's something that your congregation is interested in doing, let me know and I'm happy to work with you. And when I go to these stewardship conferences in the past, and we're seeing how things are going south of the border, but there's another one coming up next year. So I always try and see if there's people who are interested in going. And I usually look into the people who've come up for webinars and I'm like, do you want to improve your skills even more? And yeah, so keep that in mind. Yeah, it's called Stewardship Kaleidoscope. It's a fantastic conference. Everyone I've ever taken from Canada, it's always, there's a little bit of American, bias in it, but they come back and we're like, wow, that's really deep. And I like to take people more, if I take people, I like to take them from a congregation, a minister with at least 1 or 2 lay leaders. So watch for that information. I'm going to include it and send it out for next year, even though, yeah, anyway. All right, so thank you. Oh, here's my thank you slide. Thank you for coming. If you have more questions, please email me, call me. Happy to connect with you. Hopefully see you next month.